The sun was falling slowly behind the faraway mountains, painting the sky with soft orange and gold colors. A cool wind moved gently through the tall pine trees, making a quiet sound like a whisper. In the middle of this wide, empty land, a single cowboy rode his horse along a narrow path that curved between rocks and trees. His name was Elijah Carter. He was a quiet man, the kind of man who spoke little but thought a lot. Elijah had been traveling for many days without seeing another person. His hat was dusty, his boots were worn, and his shirt was a little torn from pushing through thick branches. But there was something strong in the way he sat in the saddle, something calm and sure. His blue eyes kept looking at the path ahead, but sometimes they lifted to study the forest around him. He knew these lands were not like the open prairies he came from. Here the forest could hide anything. It could hide life. It could hide danger. And it could hide eyes watching him. He had left the cattle ranch 2 weeks ago with only his horse, a bedroll, a canteen, and a small bag of food. He had grown tired of working for other men, tired of moving herds from one place to another. He wanted a piece of land to call his own, a quiet place where no one would tell him what to do. The idea of starting fresh gave him hope. He had heard about a valley beyond these woods near a river that never dried up. It was said to be beautiful and empty, but it wasn't empty. It belonged to the Apache people, and Elijah knew that well. Every step of his horse made a soft sound against the forest floor. Birds called from high in the trees, and sometimes a squirrel ran across the path. But under those soft sounds, Elijah felt something else, a weight in the air. A silence that came and went. It was as if the forest itself was breathing slowly. He didn't see anyone, but more than once he felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He was not alone. He stopped his horse for a moment and listened. The forest seemed quiet, too quiet. Elijah tilted his head, waiting for a sign. A stick breaking. A shadow moving. Nothing came. He gave a small smile to himself. "Keep moving," he whispered to his horse. The animal made a low sound in reply and began walking again. Elijah was no stranger to being watched. He had traveled across lands where strangers didn't always welcome outsiders. He respected that. He didn't blame anyone for protecting their home. If he were in their place, he'd do the same. So he made sure his actions were careful. He never left trash behind. He never cut trees he didn't need to. He tried to move through the forest like a guest, not an invader. He hoped whoever might be watching could see that. The air grew cooler as the evening came. Long shadows stretched across the ground, making the forest look like a painting with dark and light shapes dancing together. Elijah's stomach growled softly. He hadn't eaten much that day, just a small piece of dried bread and a few sips of water. He told himself he'd stop soon and make a small camp before the night got too cold. But still, something held him back from relaxing. It was the feeling, soft but strong, that he was being followed. Maybe from far behind, maybe from above on a ridge, maybe by someone who was patient and skilled. He didn't panic. Instead, he adjusted the strap on his bag, kept his movement slow, and kept his eyes open. He thought about the stories he had heard in the towns he passed through. Old men sitting near the fire at night would talk in low voices. They spoke about brave Apache warriors moving like shadows through the forest, seeing everything, hearing everything. Some stories said they were ghosts that no outsider could ever see. Others said they could follow a man for days without making a single sound. Elijah never believed in ghost stories, but he did believe in people who knew their land better than anyone else. The forest was their home. He was a stranger. That truth sat in his chest like a quiet heartbeat. A rabbit ran across the path in front of his horse, making the animal jerk its head up in surprise. Elijah gently patted the horse's neck. "Easy now," he whispered. The horse calmed down, but its ears stayed pointed, turning toward a direction Elijah didn't see. It made him frown. Horses could sense things before humans did. He trusted that more than any map. He decided to set up camp near a small clearing by a stream. The sound of running water always made him feel less alone. He climbed off his horse and led it to drink from the stream. The horse lowered its head, its breath making small ripples in the water. Elijah knelt, splashed cool water on his face, and took a long drink. The water was fresh and cold. It gave him a small strength again. As he worked, he kept his eyes moving. His hands untied the bedroll, but his mind was listening to the forest. A bird flew up suddenly from a branch, wings flapping fast. Elijah looked at the direction it came from, narrowing his eyes. He didn't see anything, but birds didn't fly like that for no reason. He made a small fire no bigger than his hands, just enough to keep warm in boil water. The flames danced quietly, sending tiny sparks into the night air. Elijah sat with his back against a log, hat low over his forehead, and let the forest sounds fill the space around him. The wind, the water, the crackle of the fire, and somewhere far out in the darkness something else. Maybe footsteps, maybe only the wind. But it was there. He reached slowly for his old revolver, not to use it, but to make sure it was there. The cold metal under his fingers gave him a small comfort. He had no wish to fight anyone. He only wanted to pass through. But being careful didn't hurt. As the firelight flickered, memories came back to him. Days of riding across endless plains, sleeping under the stars, and listening to the night speak in its quiet language. He remembered the times when he was alone but not afraid, because the land itself was his companion. But here in these woods things felt different. This place had its own spirit, strong and silent. He could feel it pressing close around him. The moon rose slowly through the branches, pale and full. It lit the forest in soft silver light, making every leaf and branch look sharp and alive. Elijah stared at the trees for a long time. If someone was out there, they were patient, watching, waiting, not ready to show themselves yet. His horse shifted its weight, ears flicking back and forth. Elijah rubbed its neck gently. "We'll be fine," he whispered. His voice was steady, even if his heart beat a little faster than usual. In truth, Elijah had always carried a quiet respect for the people who lived on this land long before he came. He didn't see them as enemies. He didn't see himself as a conqueror either. He was just a man with a dream, a small piece of land, a simple life and peace. But dreams don't always come easy. Sometimes the road to them goes through places where history is deep, where strangers are tested before they're allowed to pass. He lay down near the fire, one arm resting over his eyes, the other near his side. He didn't plan to sleep too deeply. The night was not the kind that gave easy rest. Above him the stars appeared between gaps in the trees, millions of tiny lights like silent watchers in the sky. They had seen people come and go for centuries. They had watched this forest long before Elijah was born. Somewhere far off an owl called. The sound was low and soft, floating through the trees like a whisper. The forest was alive even in its stillness. Elijah listened until the sound faded away. He didn't know that eyes were already watching him. A young woman moved silently through the trees above his camp. She had been following him since the river crossing 2 days ago. Her steps made no sound. She blended with the forest as if she were part of it. Her long dark hair was tied back with a strip of leather, and the soft earth carried no sign of her feet. She watched him with calm, steady eyes, studying the way he moved, the way he treated the land. She noticed that he did not break more branches than he needed. He didn't throw away food. He didn't shout or make careless noise. He treated the forest like something alive, and that made her curious. Many outsiders came here. Most were loud, careless, and disrespectful. But this one was different. She didn't know yet what to think of him, but she wanted to see more. As Elijah turned on his side near the fire, unaware of her quiet figure among the shadows, the story that would change both their lives had already begun. The forest held its breath. The wind grew softer. The stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter. In this quiet moment, 2 lives crossed paths without a single word spoken. One man dreamed of a home. One woman watched with sharp eyes. And the forest, ancient and wise, watched them both. For 2 long days, Elijah Carter rode through the quiet forest without seeing a single person, but someone had been there all along, moving in silence like a shadow between the tall trees. That someone was Nita, a young Apache woman with sharp eyes, steady hands, and a spirit that belonged completely to the land around her. She had first seen him when he crossed the shallow river at dawn. The water sparkled in the early light, and his horse made soft splashes as it stepped across the stones. She had crouched on a high ridge hidden behind a thick bush and watched him carefully. He didn't look like the others who sometimes entered their land without respect. He was quiet, calm, almost gentle with everything around him. That made her curious. Nita had been taught from childhood how to read every sign in the forest, the sound of a twig, the direction of a bird's flight, the change in wind. Her people could follow a deer for hours without it ever noticing, so following Elijah was not difficult for her. She stayed far enough to not be seen, but close enough to know where he was going. She saw the way he spoke softly to his horse, The way he stopped to touch the leaves of a bush before passing it, as if greeting the land itself. He carried a calmness with him, but she didn't trust easily. Strangers had brought trouble before. Her people had suffered for trusting too fast. So she watched and waited. The forest was her home, and in her home she moved like the wind. She could climb rocks without a sound. She could slide down a hill like a leaf on water. At night, when Elijah rested near his small fire, Nita stayed hidden among the dark trees, no more than a shape in the shadows. She listened to his soft hums, little tunes he sang to keep himself company. She watched how he never left trash behind, how he respected the stream, how he didn't break more branches than he needed for fire. It told her something important. He was careful. He was not careless like others, but Nita's reason for following him was not only curiosity. She had been sent to watch. The elders in her village had noticed signs, strange hoofprints near the river, soft trails made by boots, a new scent of tobacco in the air. They knew someone had entered their land. Nita, quick and skilled, had offered to track the stranger. She wanted to prove herself, not just as a hunter but as a guardian of their home. So she followed Elijah with silent determination. On the second morning, the forest was wrapped in a soft mist. It hung low between the trees, making everything look like a dream. Elijah's breath came out in small clouds as he guided his horse through the wet grass. Nita moved along the ridges above him, blending into the fog. Her braid brushed against her shoulder as she crouched low to the ground, watching his every move. A bluebird flew out of a bush near Elijah's horse. It startled the animal for a second. Elijah gave a soft chuckle and whispered something to calm it. That small sound of laughter reached Nita's ears. It surprised her. Most outsiders were loud, rough, or afraid. This one laughed softly to his horse as if the forest was his friend. She didn't know why, but that sound made her lower her bow just a little. As the day grew brighter, Elijah stopped near a fallen log to rest. He took a piece of bread from his bag and shared a bit with his horse. Nita watched from behind a rock. She could have stepped forward then. She could have shown herself. But she didn't. She wanted to see more. She wanted to understand who he really was before deciding anything. She remembered her grandmother's words. A stranger can carry a storm or a river. You must learn to tell the difference. So Nita watched his hands. His hands moved slowly without hurry. His eyes kept scanning the trees, alert but not fearful. He seemed to respect what he did not understand. That was something rare. Later that afternoon, Elijah entered a deeper part of the forest where the trees grew close together, their branches meeting above like a roof. Sunlight came through in thin golden lines falling across the path like long fingers. Here the air felt heavier. Even the birds seemed quieter. Nita followed from above on a hidden trail only her people knew. It curved along a ridge and gave her a clear view of him below. She lifted her bow more than once. It wasn't to harm him. It was part of her way of testing herself and testing him. She aimed at his back from a distance, steady as the wind. She watched how he moved. A man who feared the forest would look over his shoulder constantly, but Elijah didn't. He didn't act like someone running or hiding. He acted like someone passing through with respect. Nita lowered her bow each time. Something inside her told her this man was different. As the sun began to set, Elijah reached a small clearing with a round stone in the middle. This place was quiet, too quiet. Nita stopped on a high ledge to watch carefully. He tied his horse loosely to a tree and walked to the stream to fill his canteen. The forest around them held its breath. Nita moved closer than before. She stepped softly between the roots of an old oak tree, her footsteps silent as falling snow. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something she couldn't name yet. She was now close enough to see the lines on his face, the way his hair curled under his hat, the way his shirt clung to his back after hours of travel. He looked tired but steady, like a man who had walked many miles with a clear purpose. A squirrel ran across a branch above Elijah's head, knocking down a small pine cone. It hit the ground with a tiny thud. Elijah looked up quickly, eyes narrowing, sensing movement. Nita froze behind a tree, barely breathing. His hand moved toward his side slowly, not fast, not in panic, just carefully. He scanned the trees. His eyes passed right over where she stood, but he didn't see her. After a moment, he relaxed again and turned back to his fire. Nita let out a slow, quiet breath. She had tested him. He didn't react like someone dangerous. He reacted like someone who respected the forest's signs. As darkness came, Elijah made a small fire again. He boiled water for tea, using a tin cup that had seen many years of travel. The flame glowed softly on his face, showing a calm expression. Nita stayed hidden a few steps away, crouched low near a thick bush. The warmth of the fire reached her faintly. The smell of warm tea filled the air. She felt a strange pull in her chest. She had spent many nights in the forest, but this night felt different. The man she was watching didn't seem like a threat, but she still didn't know who he was or why he had come. She remembered the faces of her people back in the village, the elders who had trusted her with this task. She couldn't return without being sure. The moon rose slowly again, lighting the tops of the trees in silver. Elijah leaned back against a log, hat low, eyes half closed. Nita stayed awake. She had the patience of the forest itself. Hours passed and he didn't make any sudden moves. He slept lightly, like someone used to the road. When the first light of dawn came, Nita climbed silently to a higher ledge and looked down at his camp. Mist hugged the ground like a thin blanket. Elijah stretched slowly, rubbed his eyes, and smiled faintly at his horse. The way he greeted the morning made Nita feel something she hadn't expected, a quiet warmth. She remembered being a child, running through the same forest, laughing with her friends before the world became serious. Back then, the land felt big and safe. Watching this stranger greet the morning reminded her of that feeling for a small moment. As he packed his things, she followed him again, her steps light as a bird's shadow. She was closer now. If he had turned around, maybe he would have seen a flicker of movement between the trees. But he didn't. His trust in the forest was both his strength and his weakness. Nita reached a point where she could have stepped out and faced him, but something held her back. She wasn't ready. She wanted to know more. She wanted to see how far he would go and what his heart would show through his actions. She pressed her palm softly against the bark of a tree, a quiet promise to herself. She would keep following. She would watch him until she truly knew who he was. The forest moved with her. A soft breeze rose, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Birds began their morning songs. Elijah rode ahead, unaware that his path was no longer just his own. From that moment on, his journey was silently tied to hers. Two travelers in the same woods, one in the open, one in the shadows. Neither of them spoke a word to each other yet. But a story had already begun to grow quietly between them, like a small flame hidden inside the forest's heart. Nita, the silent watcher, and Elijah, the quiet wanderer, moved through the same land with steps guided by something greater than either of them knew. Elijah Carter's small fire crackled softly under the night sky. The forest around him was quiet, as if it were listening to something. The stars were clear that night, shining like tiny lamps in the dark. He sat close to the flames, warming his hands slowly, his hat resting beside him on the ground. The steady breathing of his horse reached him from a few steps away. It had been another long day of travel. His shoulders were heavy, his boots dusty, and his thoughts full. The deeper he went into this forest, the stronger the strange feeling became, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't a loud or frightening feeling. It was quiet, like a hand resting lightly on his back. It had been with him for days, and now it sat close, just beyond the reach of the firelight. He had not seen anyone, not a single person, since entering this land. But he trusted his senses. His years on the trail had taught him to listen to the forest's whispers. Tonight, the whispers were louder. He stirred the fire with a stick and let his mind wander. He thought about the small house he wanted to build by a river. He thought about quiet mornings and soft evenings. A life with no one ordering him around, no noise of crowded towns, just peace. That dream had kept him moving when the road got lonely. But dreams had to cross through real places, and this forest was real. It had eyes. It had rules. He respected that. As Elijah watched the fire, a soft sound came from somewhere behind him. It was small, like a leaf turning over or a boot on a twig. He did not move right away. He only lifted his head a little and listened. His heartbeat stayed calm. The sound didn't come again, but it had been real. Slowly, without rushing, Elijah reached for the metal cup hanging near the fire. He moved as if everything was normal, but his eyes began to travel carefully around the dark edges of the clearing. The moonlight was pale and silver, touching only the tops of the trees. Below, where the shadows gathered, anything could be hiding. And something was. Not far from where Elijah sat, Nita crouched in the shadow of a thick pine tree. She had been following him for 3 days, watching his every step. Tonight, something inside her told her the time to stay hidden was ending. She had seen enough to know he was different from the others who crossed their land, but she also knew her people expected her to protect their home. She had watched the way he respected the river, the way he spoke softly to his horse, and how he never left anything behind. But she still needed to be sure, so she waited for the right moment, a moment when their eyes would meet, and she would learn something more than footsteps could ever tell her. The firelight touched her cheek faintly, but Elijah could not see her yet. She moved a little closer, each step as quiet as the breath of the night. Her hand brushed the cold bark of a tree as she came to the edge of the clearing. She could see him clearly now, the cowboy with tired eyes and a steady face. The man who seemed to be both alone and at peace with the forest. Elijah's horse lifted its head suddenly and made a low sound in its throat. Its ears turned sharply toward the dark line of trees. Elijah's hand paused over his cup. He lifted his head. His eyes narrowed, searching the darkness. The air seemed to hold its breath. Nita stepped out from the shadow. She moved slowly, not rushing, her steps measured and quiet. The moonlight fell on her dark braid, on the beads around her neck, and on her strong, calm eyes. She wore soft deer-hide clothes that blended with the forest, and around her neck was a string with a small carved stone, a sign from her people. For the first time, Elijah saw the person who had been following him. His breath caught for just a moment, not in fear, but in the way a traveler pauses when something important happens on the road. Nita's gaze locked on his. She held no weapon pointed at him, though her bow hung lightly in her hand. Her eyes were steady, neither hard nor soft, just sure, like the river that flows without asking permission. Elijah did not stand. He stayed seated, though his muscles were ready. He didn't want to make a wrong move. He slowly lifted his hands, palms open, a quiet way of saying he meant no harm. The firelight flickered across his face, showing calmness more than fear. For a few long seconds, they simply stared at each other. 2 lives, 2 worlds, meeting in the middle of a quiet forest. Nita took another step forward. She tilted her head slightly, studying the lines of his face. She had seen many outsiders before, but this one did not look at her with anger or arrogance. His eyes were clear, focused, curious but respectful. Elijah finally spoke, his voice soft. "Evening." She didn't answer in his language. She didn't have to. Her silence said more than words. She simply watched him, every movement, every breath. She wanted to know if the calm in his eyes was real or just a mask. He pointed slowly at the ground near the fire. "If you want to sit," he said quietly, though he didn't expect her to understand. He spoke softly, like one might speak to a shy animal, not because she was weak, but because he didn't want to scare her away. She didn't sit. She didn't speak. But she didn't leave either. That told him enough. The flames popped softly. A small spark rose into the night air and disappeared. Nita's eyes followed it for a moment before returning to his face. She could feel something strange inside her chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something like standing on a bridge between 2 worlds. She raised her hand slowly, pointing toward the west. Then she tapped her chest and pointed back the way she came. Her movements were clear, practiced. She was telling him this was her land. Elijah understood enough. He gave a small nod, not lowering his gaze but not challenging hers either. "I know," he said softly, even if she didn't understand the words. "I'm just passing through." Nita watched him closely. He wasn't loud. He wasn't careless. He didn't pretend the land was his. That mattered to her more than he could know. The night wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Somewhere far away, an owl called out, its low sound drifting between the trees. Elijah sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees. Nita stood a few steps from the fire, the glow touching the edges of her face. They were 2 strangers speaking no common language, but somehow, they were already beginning to understand each other. She lowered her bow gently and placed it on her shoulder. She could have disappeared into the forest again, and he would have never caught her, but she stayed. Something inside her told her to stay just a little longer. Elijah felt a small, unexpected warmth rise in his chest. Not excitement, not fear. Something quieter, It had been a long time since he had looked into someone's eyes in the middle of nowhere and felt something shift inside him. Something that said this moment was not like any other. A breeze moved through the clearing, making the flames dance. Nita's braid swayed gently against her shoulder. She finally turned slightly, her body facing the forest again. For a moment, Elijah thought she would disappear the way shadows disappear at dawn. But before she stepped away, she looked back at him one more time. Just a glance, strong, measured, curious, and then she was gone. She moved into the forest so quietly that the night barely noticed. Elijah stared at the spot where she had stood, wondering if she had been real at all. His horse snorted softly. He reached over and rubbed its neck, whispering, "Well, friend, I guess we're not alone after all." He leaned back against the log again, but the forest no longer felt quite the same. It didn't feel like it was watching him with cold eyes. It felt different, warmer somehow, as if the forest itself had just spoken to him through her presence. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay near the fire, listening to the quiet rhythm of the night. But his mind replayed the image of her, the steady way she looked at him, the strength in her silence. Somewhere not too far away, Nita stood on a ridge, looking down at the glowing dot of his campfire. She had surprised herself by stepping into the open. She hadn't planned to, but something about the way he moved, the way he sat by that fire, made her trust that moment. She wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders and whispered something soft in her language. A promise to the wind. She didn't know what this stranger's story was, but she wanted to understand it. Two paths had crossed. Neither of them knew where it would lead, but the forest, old and quiet, seemed to know. It had a way of bringing people together in its own silent rhythm, and so the cowboy by the fire and the Apache woman in the trees lay under the same sky, breathing the same cool night air. Neither of them could sleep easily, not because they were afraid, but because something had begun. Something small, quiet, and powerful. It was the beginning of a bond they didn't yet have words for. The next morning, the forest woke up slowly. Soft light spilled through the tall pine trees, brushing the leaves with gold. Birds sang their morning songs, and the sound of a small stream nearby blended gently with the wind. Elijah Carter opened his eyes, feeling the cool air on his face. His horse was already awake, moving its ears toward the forest like it was listening to something he couldn't hear. Elijah sat up, rubbing his eyes. His body was tired from the long ride, but his mind was alive. The image of the woman from last night filled his thoughts. The way she stepped out from the shadows, the strength in her eyes, the silence that spoke louder than words. She was real, not a dream, and he was sure she was still close. He poured water from his canteen into his tin cup and drank slowly. The forest was quiet in a way that made him feel like it was waiting for something. He saddled his horse and got ready to move again. He had no map, only the direction in his mind, west toward the valley he hoped to find. But today, for the first time, he didn't feel like he was traveling alone. As he started along the narrow path, the forest seemed to follow him with soft eyes. He didn't see her, but deep down he knew she was there, watching, maybe guiding. High above the path, hidden between rocks and trees, Nita moved like a shadow. She had spent the night watching the soft glow of his fire until the flames turned to pale smoke. Something inside her had shifted. She had stepped out to face him. She had looked into his eyes, and what she saw there wasn't something she could forget easily. His eyes had no hardness, no arrogance. They carried a quiet strength but also kindness, and for someone like Nita, raised to see strangers as a possible danger, that kindness was something rare. It stayed in her mind like a gentle wind that doesn't leave even after the storm passes. She followed him that morning without hiding as much as before. She didn't walk behind him like a hunter now. She moved beside him from a distance, close enough to protect her land but near enough to let him feel her presence. Elijah noticed small signs that told him she was near. A small stone rolled softly on the path above. A bird flew up at the exact moment he turned his head. A shadow disappeared into the trees. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He simply kept walking, and every now and then he lifted his eyes to the ridges just to let her know he wasn't pretending she didn't exist. At midday, Elijah reached a shallow river. The water ran clear, sparkling under the warm sunlight. He climbed down from his horse and let it drink. He knelt beside the stream, cupped his hands and drank the cool water too. As he splashed his face, he looked at his reflection in the water. Tired, yes, but alive. Behind him, a faint sound made him turn slightly. She was there. Nita stood on the other side of the river, her figure calm and steady. The sunlight touched her dark braid, making it shine softly. Her bow hung loosely on her shoulder. She didn't come as a hunter this time. She came as something else, something not yet named between them. Their eyes met again, just like the night before. But in the day's light, it felt different. It felt more real. She didn't speak, and neither did he. But she lifted her hand slowly and pointed upstream. Then she looked back at him, waiting. Elijah understood what she was trying to say. She wanted him to follow. Not just anywhere, but on a path she chose. A path through the forest. She could have sent him away. She could have left him to get lost. But she didn't. She was giving him something rare, a chance. He gave a small nod. Not a word. Just trust. She turned and began walking along the riverbank with quiet steps. Elijah mounted his horse and followed on the opposite side. Sometimes she disappeared behind the trees, but she always returned into view. She moved like water itself, smooth, silent, strong. The forest grew thicker as they went deeper. Tall trees stood close together, their roots twisting like sleeping snakes under the soil. Rays of sunlight fell through the leaves in narrow golden lines dancing on the ground. The air smelled like pine and earth. It was beautiful, wild but gentle. Hours passed like this. They didn't speak, but something warm grew between them. It was not loud or fast. It was quiet, steady, like a campfire that burns low but strong. Elijah began to trust her without needing a reason, and Nita began to understand him without needing words. Later in the afternoon, Nita stopped near a small open field surrounded by rocks. The grass here was soft and a breeze moved gently across it. She turned to face him. Elijah stopped his horse and waited. She pointed toward the valley ahead and then at him. She was asking if that was where he was going. Yes, he said softly, even though she might not understand. That's where I'm headed. She tilted her head, her dark eyes thoughtful. Then she walked closer to the edge of the open space and drew a line in the dirt with a stick. One line going west, another curving away. Then she looked back at him. He understood. She was showing him two paths, the easy way, which might be dangerous, and the safe way, which would take longer. She was offering to guide him. Elijah stepped down from his horse slowly. The wind caught the brim of his hat brushing against his face. He walked toward her, careful not to make sudden moves. When he reached the drawing, he pointed at the longer path, the one she had made to the side. It was a quiet way of saying, I trust your way. Nita's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. It was the first soft change in her expression since they met. They began walking together. Not side by side, not yet, but closer than before. She led him through narrow paths only someone who knew the forest deeply could find. She showed him where to step over hidden roots, where the ground was soft, where the water ran deep. He followed carefully, watching, learning. And sometimes, when she looked back to make sure he was still behind her, their eyes met briefly, like two quiet birds passing each other in the sky. As the sun lowered in the sky, they came to a rocky ridge that opened to a wide view. The forest stretched below like a sea of green. Beyond it, the mountains stood tall, painted in gold by the sunset. The sight made Elijah's chest fill with quiet wonder. It was the kind of view that made you feel both small and alive at the same time. Nita stood at the edge of the ridge, the wind lifting a few strands of hair around her face. Elijah stood a few steps behind her, not wanting to disturb the quiet moment. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. The beauty of the land spoke for them. He saw how at home she was in this place. The way she stood there was like the land itself trusted her, and in that moment Elijah understood something. This forest was not just a place she lived in. It was part of who she was. As darkness began to fall, they stopped at a small clearing near a stream. Nita crouched down to gather dry sticks for a small fire. Elijah did the same, carefully placing the wood in the center. When the first sparks turned into a gentle flame, their faces glowed in the warm light. The soft sound of running water and crickets filled the night. Nita sat on one side of the fire, Elijah on the other. The air was cool, but the fire made it soft. For the first time, they shared the same space, not as hunter and stranger, but as travelers resting together under the same stars. She took out a small piece of dried cornbread from her pouch and placed it near the fire. Elijah reached into his bag and took out a bit of his own food. Simple but enough. Without thinking too hard, he offered her a piece. She hesitated for a second, then reached out and took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but the space between them felt warmer than the fire. They ate quietly. The forest whispered around them. An owl called out somewhere far away. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence that builds something new between people. A silence that doesn't need words. Elijah watched the flames and then looked at her. "Thank you," he said softly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the way he said them. She nodded once, slowly. For the first time since entering this land, Elijah didn't feel like an outsider. And for the first time, Nita didn't feel like she was guarding the forest alone. Above them, the stars spread wide and endless. Two travelers sat by the same fire, bound by quiet trust. Their paths, once separate, were slowly drawing closer, not with loud promises, but with the soft rhythm of shared steps, shared glances, and shared silence. The night was soft, and the stars above the forest shone like quiet lamps. Elijah sat close to the fire, feeling the warmth on his face and the cool air on his back. The forest was calm, almost peaceful, like it was listening to a story that only it could understand. Nita sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the fire. Neither of them spoke, yet it felt as if words were passing between them, unspoken but clear. For days now they had walked the same path. At first she had been a shadow, then a guide, and now in this moment she was something more. Not a stranger anymore, but a part of the journey itself. Elijah had not planned to meet anyone in these woods. He had come here chasing a dream of land and peace. But dreams had a way of changing shape when life touched them. Nita looked up at the stars. She thought of her people, of the village tucked away beyond the hills where fires burned softly at night and children's laughter filled the air. She had grown up learning that strangers from outside could not be trusted. But here she was, sitting beside one, feeling something gentle rise in her heart, something that made her believe not all stories were the same. The next morning came with golden light spilling through the trees. A soft mist hung low over the stream and the sound of birds welcomed the day. Elijah woke before the sun rose fully. He sat quietly, watching the forest wake up. He had traveled far and seen many places, but none had ever felt quite like this. It wasn't just the land. It was her. The way she walked through the forest as if it were part of her heartbeat. The way her silence felt safe. She appeared from behind the trees a few minutes later, carrying a handful of wild berries and a piece of dried bread from her pouch. She placed them between them without saying a word. Elijah smiled, a small and warm smile. "Breakfast?" he said softly, though he knew she might not understand the word. Still, she seemed to understand the feeling behind it. They ate together as the sun slowly climbed higher. A quiet rhythm had grown between them, a rhythm made of simple actions, of looks that lasted a little longer than before, of silence that spoke more than words. It wasn't forced. It was natural, like the river flowing through the valley. As they packed up to move again, Nita led Elijah along a new path. This time she walked closer, not hidden behind trees or rocks. Elijah's horse followed them gently, its steps soft on the forest floor. Their journey was no longer just about reaching a valley. It was about what they had found along the way. By midday, they reached a ridge where the forest opened into a breathtaking view. Below them, the valley stretched wide. A river curved through the center, sparkling like silver in the sunlight. Open fields spread on both sides, green and golden. The mountains rose proudly in the distance. It was the land Elijah had been searching for. His chest filled with quiet joy as he stared at the view. It was more beautiful than he had imagined. A place where a man could build a small home, grow food, and live in peace. He turned to her, wanting to share that feeling, and found her already watching him. Nita studied his face as he looked at the valley. She saw the way his eyes softened, the way he seemed to breathe a little deeper. She could tell this place meant something to him. And that stirred something inside her heart, too. She knew this land. She had walked its trails since childhood. She also knew her people had guarded it for generations. But something about the way he looked at it, with respect, not greed, made it feel like the land itself was welcoming him. She pointed down toward the valley, then to herself, then to him. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. She was asking something without words. Was this where his path would stay? Elijah understood. He placed a hand over his chest, then pointed to the valley, too. Yes, he said softly. He didn't need to say more. The way his voice trembled just a little was enough to show how much this meant to him. They walked down into the valley together. The grass brushed gently against their boots, and a warm wind blew across the open space. Birds flew overhead, their shadows sliding over the ground like paint across a canvas. The closer they got to the river, the softer the world seemed to become. It felt like the land itself had been waiting for them. Nita stopped near a tall cottonwood tree that stood by the riverbank. Its roots stretched deep into the earth, its leaves shining in the light. She placed her hand on the trunk and closed her eyes for a moment. To her people, trees like this were not just trees. They were silent keepers of time. They had seen everything, remembered everything. She wanted the land to know that something important was happening here. Elijah dismounted from his horse and walked toward the river. He knelt, scooping water into his hands. The river was cold and clear, running with a soft music that made him smile without thinking. He had found the place he'd been dreaming of. But this time, it didn't feel like his dream alone. It felt like theirs. As the day passed, they stayed near the river. Nita showed him where the ground was soft and good for growing food. She showed him the way the river curved gently in springtime, rising just enough to water the soil but never to flood it. She moved with quiet confidence, and he followed with respect. When the sun began to set, painting the valley in orange and pink light, they sat together beneath the cottonwood tree. The wind moved gently through the branches, and the sound of the river filled the air. It wasn't a loud or exciting moment. It was soft, calm, the kind of moment that stays in memory long after words are forgotten. Elijah looked at her. She looked back. For a few heartbeats, everything else faded. The forest, the wind, the years behind them. Only this moment remained. He didn't speak quickly. He took a deep breath and placed his hand gently over his chest. "Thank you," he said softly. She didn't need to know the exact meaning to understand the feeling. The warmth in his voice said enough. She reached out and touched the ground between them with her fingertips, a quiet way of saying this place belongs to the land first. But the land has room for both of us. It wasn't a promise in words, but it was a promise in silence. That night they built a small fire by the river. The stars above the valley looked brighter than ever. Their faces glowed softly in the firelight. Elijah cooked a bit of the food he carried, while Nita brought herbs she had collected nearby. Together they made something simple but warm. They ate in silence, but their silence felt full, like the air before rain. The fire cracked gently. A soft breeze brushed against their faces. Nita sat with her knees pulled up, resting her chin lightly. Elijah leaned back on his elbows, looking up at the stars. Neither of them needed to fill the air with talk. They already understood what mattered. In his heart, Elijah knew that this place was no longer just a dream of land. It was a beginning he could never have reached without her. And in her heart, Nita felt something she had not expected. A soft trust. The kind that grows slowly, like roots beneath the soil. She knew the world outside could be hard. But here, in this quiet valley, something gentle had taken shape between them. As the fire burned lower, Elijah turned his head and saw her watching the flames. The light made her eyes shine like amber. She didn't look like a stranger anymore. She looked like someone who had become part of his story without ever asking for it. He smiled, small but real. She saw it and gave a quiet nod, her way of smiling back. The night wrapped around them like a blanket. Above, the stars stretched across the sky like an endless river of light. Below, two people who had once walked separate paths now shared the same fire, the same silence, the same beginning. The cowboy had come to the lonely woods searching for land. The Apache woman had followed him to protect her home. But the forest had written a different story, a story not of fear but of trust. A story of two people finding something stronger than they expected. And in the quiet heart of the valley, under the whispering cottonwood tree, their lives slowly began to weave together like threads in a single cloth, soft, steady, and lasting.